On a rain-soaked street in Tondo, Manila, a 25-year-old woman clutched a small gold locket to her chest and ran. Her name was Liza Mendoza, and 20 minutes ago, she had been a live-in maid in one of the wealthiest households in Forbes Park. Now, she was barefoot, soaking wet, and carrying a secret that could bring a billionaire to his knees. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew that everything she had ever believed about her life was a lie. 3 blocks behind her, in a mansion worth more than most people would earn in 10 lifetimes, a man named Ramon Alejandro Ramos stood in his marble foyer and slammed the front door so hard the chandelier trembled. His wife flinched. His daughter stepped back. The household staff froze. Sir Ramon, as everyone called him, was a man who controlled shipping empires, sat on boards of multinational corporations, and never lost his composure. But tonight, his hands were shaking, because the maid had found something she was never supposed to see. And now, nothing would ever be the same. To understand what happened that night, you have to go back 6 months, to a small, crumbling house in a barangay outside Legazpi City, Albay. That was where Liza Mendoza grew up. Her mother, Elena, was a laundrywoman who took in other people's clothes to wash by hand in a concrete basin behind their house. Her younger brother, Junjun, was 19 and had been in a wheelchair since a motorcycle accident 2 years earlier. The family survived on less than 500 pesos a day. But they never missed Sunday Mass. They never went to bed without praying together, and Aling Nena never once let her children believe they were poor in spirit. Liza was the quiet engine of the Mendoza family. She had graduated valedictorian from their barangay high school, but couldn't afford college. She worked at a local carinderia, then as a market vendor, then as a part-time tutor. Anything to keep food on the table and pay for Junjun's physical therapy. When a recruitment agency in Manila posted an opening for a live-in housekeeper at a wealthy family's home in Makati, Liza applied without telling her mother. The salary was 15,000 pesos a month, more than triple what she was making. She got the job, and 2 weeks later, she packed a single bag, kissed her mother's hands, whispered a prayer over Junjun's sleeping head, and boarded a bus to Manila. The Ramos mansion in Forbes Park was unlike anything Liza had ever seen. 12 bedrooms, a swimming pool that glowed turquoise at night, a kitchen larger than her entire house in Albay. The walls were hung with paintings that cost more than her family's annual income. The garage held 4 imported cars. The garden had a full-time staff of 3. Liza stood in the service entrance on her first day and felt as though she had stepped into a different country, one that existed just a few kilometers from the streets where children begged for leftover rice. Sir Ramon Ramos was 62 years old, silver-haired, and built like a man who had once worked with his hands before his money worked for him. He was cold, but not cruel, the kind of employer who would nod at you in the hallway, but never ask your name. He spent most of his time in his study or at his corporate offices in Bonifacio Global City. When he was home, the house went quiet, not out of fear exactly, but out of a gravity that surrounded him, as if his silence carried more weight than most people's words. His wife, Elena Santos Ramos, was a different story entirely. Elena came from old Visayan money and carried herself with the precise, manicured cruelty of a woman who believed that wealth was a birthright and poverty was a character flaw. She spoke to Liza the way one might speak to a piece of furniture that had been placed in the wrong room. Their daughter, Clara, was 23, 2 years younger than Liza, and had inherited her mother's sharp tongue without her mother's intelligence to temper it. Clara treated the household staff as entertainment, mocking their accents, their clothes, their food. Within her first week, Liza learned the unspoken rule of the Ramos household. Sir Ramon was the king, Elena was the enforcer, Clara was the blade, and the staff existed only to be invisible. Despite everything, Liza worked. She worked the way only someone with a family depending on her can work, with focus, endurance, and a silence that Elena mistook for submission. She woke at 4:30 every morning to prepare Sir Ramon's black coffee exactly the way he liked it. No sugar, brewed twice, served in the blue porcelain cup. She ironed tablecloths until they were flawless. She scrubbed bathroom tiles on her hands and knees, and every Sunday, on her one afternoon off, she walked to a nearby parish church, lit a candle for Junjun, and then stopped at a street corner near Guadalupe, where she shared her packed lunch with the street children who gathered there. She never told anyone about this. She never needed to. The first sign of danger came 3 months into her employment. Liza was folding laundry in the upstairs hallway when she heard Elena's voice coming from the master bedroom, low, tight, and furious. Elena was on the phone. Liza didn't mean to listen, but the words cut through the closed door like glass. "The accounts are overdrawn. If Ramon finds out, it's finished. I need to move the money before the audit." Liza kept folding. She told herself it wasn't her business, but she filed the information away the way a survivor files away the location of the exits. 2 weeks later, Elena's tone toward Liza shifted from cold indifference to something sharper, more targeted. Small things went missing from the house. A silver picture frame, a pair of Elena's earrings, a crystal vase from the dining room. Each time, Elena made a point of searching the servants' quarters in front of the other staff. Each time, Liza's belongings were inspected with theatrical suspicion. Nothing was found, but the message was clear. Elena was building a case, and Liza was the target. The humiliation reached its peak at a dinner party Elena hosted for her socialite circle. 30 guests, imported wine, a string quartet. Liza was serving canapes when Clara, 3 glasses of champagne deep, announced to the table that the new maid was probably stealing silverware to send back to her little province. The table laughed. Liza's hands trembled, but she kept serving. She kept her eyes down. She kept breathing. Later that night, alone in her small room behind the kitchen, she held the gold locket her late father had given her, the only thing of value she owned, and whispered, "Tatay, tulungan mo ako." Father, help me. The locket was everything to Liza. Her father, Ernesto Mendoza, had died when she was 8 years old. He was a fisherman, strong, quiet, and kind. And the locket was the last gift he gave her before a typhoon took his boat and never brought it back. Inside the locket was a tiny, faded photograph. Liza had looked at it 1,000 times. A young woman holding a baby, standing beside a man whose face was partially obscured by a fold in the paper. Aling Nena always said the photo was of Liza as a baby with her parents. Liza never questioned it. Why would she? One morning, Liza woke to find the locket gone from her bedside table. She searched everywhere, under the mattress, behind the dresser, in the bathroom, in the laundry. It was gone. She asked the other staff. No one had seen it. When she approached Elena to report the loss, Elena barely looked up from her phone. "Maybe you should keep better track of your things." That afternoon, Clara posted a photo on Instagram of herself wearing a gold locket that looked exactly like Liza's, captioned "Vintage Finds." Liza saw the post on the kitchen staff's shared phone. Her blood went cold. Liza confronted Clara politely, carefully, the way a person with no power confronts a person with all of it. Clara denied everything, then turned the accusation around. "You're accusing me of stealing? That's rich, coming from the help." Within an hour, Elena summoned Liza to the living room. Sir Ramon was present but silent. Elena spoke in a measured voice. Valuables had been going missing. The household could no longer trust Liza. She was terminated, effective immediately. Liza was given 30 minutes to pack her things. No severance, no reference letter, no chance to speak. She walked out of the Ramos mansion with her single bag, minus the only thing that had ever connected her to her father, and she thought her story was over. Liza returned to Albay broken, not just unemployed, broken in the way that happens when your dignity has been publicly shredded by people who never saw you as human. Aling Nena held her daughter at the bus station and asked no questions. Junjun wheeled himself to the door and waited. The Mendoza family sat together that night in their small kitchen, ate rice with dried fish, and said nothing. Sometimes grief doesn't need words. Sometimes it just needs someone to sit with you in the silence. The following weeks were brutal. Junjun's condition worsened. The doctors in Legazpi said he needed surgery that would cost 300,000 pesos, money the family couldn't dream of. Liza applied for jobs, but the agencies in Manila had already blacklisted her. Elena had made calls. The word theft followed Liza like a shadow. She couldn't get hired as a housekeeper, a waitress, or even a market helper. She was 25 years old, and the world had already decided she was finished. One evening, while sorting through her bag for the 10th time, Liza noticed something she had missed before. Tucked into the inner lining of her bag was a photograph, old, creased, and partially torn. It must have fallen from the locket when Clara took it, slipping between the fabric layers unnoticed. Liza pulled it out carefully and held it under the single fluorescent bulb in their kitchen. It was the photograph from inside the locket, the one she had looked at 1,000 times. But this time, she saw something different. The fold in the photograph, the one that had always obscured the man's face, had come undone. The crease had softened over time, and now, for the first time in her life, Liza could see the full image. A young woman, her mother, Elena, unmistakably, holding a baby, and beside her, with his arm around her shoulders, smiling with the confident ease of a man who owned the world, was a face Liza recognized instantly. It was Sir Ramon Ramos, 30 years younger, but unmistakable. The same jaw, the same eyes, the same silver watch he still wore every day. Liza's father was not Ernesto Mendoza. Liza's father was the billionaire who had just thrown her out of his house. Liza sat at the kitchen table for 3 hours without moving. Elena found her there at midnight, staring at the photograph, and knew immediately what had happened. The secret she had kept for 25 years was finally out. Through tears, Elena told Liza everything. She and Ramon had been together before he was wealthy, when he was just a young businessman from Pampanga building his first shipping route. She had loved him. He had promised her a future, and then, when she became pregnant, he disappeared. He sent money for a year, then stopped. He married Elena, he built his empire, and Elena raised their daughter alone, giving her the surname of Ernesto, a kind fisherman who married her knowing the truth and loved Liza as his own until the sea took him. Ernesto was the father who chose her. Ramon was the father who abandoned her. Liza spent 2 weeks in agony, torn between rage, grief, and a terrifying new question. What was she supposed to do with this information? Part of her wanted to burn the photograph and forget everything. Part of her wanted to march into Forbes Park and scream the truth until the gates fell down. And part of her, the part that had been raised by Elena to believe that truth matters more than comfort, knew that she had to face Ramon, not for revenge, not for money, but because she deserved to be seen. She deserved to stand in front of the man who had abandoned her and say, "I exist." Liza borrowed money from a neighbor and took a DNA test at a clinic in Legazpi. She sent a second kit to Manila through a friend who worked near the Ramos corporate offices, a janitor who managed to retrieve a coffee cup from Sir Ramon's private conference room. The results came back in 12 days, 99.9% match. Liza Mendoza was the biological daughter of Ramon Alejandro Ramos. She held the paper in her hands and felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Not with triumph, but with the sickening clarity of a truth that changes everything it touches. She returned to Manila on a Wednesday. She wore the cleanest clothes she owned, a white blouse and a dark skirt she had ironed 3 times. She carried a folder containing the DNA results, the photograph, and a handwritten letter from Elena confirming everything. She took a jeepney to Makati, then walked the last 2 kilometers to Forbes Park. The security guard at the gate recognized her and tried to turn her away. Liza looked him in the eye and said calmly, "Tell Sir Ramon that Liza Mendoza is here, and tell him I know who my father is." Sir Ramon agreed to see her. He met her in his study, the same room where he had sat silently while Elena fired her. He was standing behind his desk when she entered. His face was stone. Liza placed the folder on his desk, opened it, and laid out the photograph, the DNA results, and her mother's letter, one by one, like cards in a game she had never wanted to play. Ramon looked at each document without touching them. His expression didn't change, but his hands, those hands that had built an empire, gripped the edge of the desk until his knuckles turned white. The silence lasted almost a full minute. Then Ramon spoke, not with anger, not with denial, but with the hollow voice of a man who had been carrying a weight for 30 years and had just felt it double. "I knew this day would come," he said. "I prayed it wouldn't, but I knew it would." He sat down slowly, as if the bones in his legs had turned to sand. And then he told Liza what he had never told anyone, not Elena, not Clara, not his lawyers, not his priests. He told her that leaving Elena was the worst thing he had ever done, that he had sent money until Elena found out and threatened to leave, taking her family's connections, the very connections that had funded his first fleet of ships, that he had chosen his empire over his child, and that he had lived with that choice every single day since. Liza listened without interrupting. When he finished, she didn't cry. She didn't shout. She said in a voice that was steady and quiet and carried the full weight of 25 years of unanswered questions, "I didn't come here for your money. I didn't come here for your name. I came here because my brother is dying, and my mother is breaking, and I needed to look into the eyes of the man who could have changed everything and chose not to. I needed to know if you were a monster or just a coward." Ramon flinched. "And what did you decide?" he asked. Liza held his gaze. "I decided you were human, and that's worse, because it means you knew what you were doing." The door to the study opened. Elena stood in the doorway, white-faced. She had been listening. Behind her, Clara hovered, her arrogance replaced by something that looked, for the first time, like fear. Elena's voice was sharp. "Ramon, what is this?" Ramon looked at his wife. Then he looked at Liza. And then he said the words that detonated every carefully constructed lie Elena had built their marriage on.
"This is my daughter."
"This is my daughter, my firstborn. And I should have told you 25 years ago." Elena's scream echoed through the marble hallway. Clara grabbed the doorframe, and Liza, the maid, the thief, the nobody from Albay, stood in the center of the room and did not move. What followed was chaos. The kind of chaos that only erupts when a lie that has held a family together finally collapses. Elena confronted Ramon with decades of suppressed fury. She revealed her own secret, the missing valuables, the overdrawn accounts. She had been siphoning money for years to fund a lifestyle that Ramon's legitimate income alone couldn't support. The theft she had pinned on Liza was a distraction, a way to remove a girl whose presence in the house made Elena inexplicably uneasy. A girl who, Elena now realized, she had been subconsciously threatened by from the moment she walked through the door, because somewhere, in a part of her mind she had refused to examine, Elena had seen Ramon's eyes looking back at her from the face of the maid. Clara apologized. It was awkward, tearful, and incomplete, the kind of apology that comes from someone who is only beginning to understand the shape of the damage they have caused. She returned the locket, she stood in front of Liza and said, "I didn't know." Liza took the locket, held it for a moment, and said, "I know you didn't, but you didn't have to be cruel to someone just because you thought they were beneath you." Clara had no answer for that. Some truths don't come with rebuttals. Ramon acted swiftly with the same decisiveness that had built his business empire. Within a week, he had arranged for Junjun's surgery at St. Luke's Medical Center in Manila, the best spinal specialists in the country. He set up a trust fund in Liza's name. He offered her a seat on the board of his foundation. He flew Elena to Manila and installed her in a comfortable apartment in Quezon City. And then he did something that stunned everyone who knew him. He made a public statement acknowledging Liza as his daughter. No lawyers, no spin. Just the truth, spoken plainly for the first time in his life. Junjun's surgery was successful. The doctors said he would walk again within a year with proper rehabilitation. When Elena heard the news, she collapsed into a chair and wept not with sadness, but with the overwhelming relief of a mother who had spent 2 decades bracing for the worst and had finally been given permission to hope. Liza sat beside her, holding her hand, and thought about Ernesto, the man who had married her mother, knowing the truth, who had raised another man's child without a single day of resentment, who had given Liza his name and his love until the ocean claimed him. The real hero of this story was not a billionaire. It was a fisherman. The healing was slow, imperfect, and ongoing the way real healing always is. Ramon and Liza didn't become a storybook father and daughter overnight. There were long silences, difficult conversations, and moments when the weight of lost years felt unbearable, but they kept showing up. Ramon flew to Albay for the first time and stood in the house where his daughter had grown up without him. He saw the concrete basin where Elena washed other people's clothes. He saw the wheelchair ramp Junjun's neighbors had built from scrap wood. He saw the small altar where Liza had prayed for him without knowing she was praying for her own father. And for the first time in his life, Ramon Ramos understood that his net worth had never been measured in pesos. Liza forgave him, not immediately and not completely. Forgiveness of that magnitude doesn't arrive like a lightning bolt. It arrives like a sunrise, slowly, unevenly, and with shadows that take time to disappear. But she forgave him, because holding on to anger would have made her into something she refused to become. She forgave him because Elena asked her to. She forgave him because Ernesto, her real father, the one who chose her, would have wanted her to. And she forgave him because she was Filipina, and in Filipino culture, the capacity for grace is not a weakness. It is the strongest thing a person can carry. 6 months later, Liza Mendoza Ramos stood in a converted warehouse in Tondo and cut the ribbon on the Ernesto Mendoza Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to providing legal aid, education, and emergency support to domestic workers across the Philippines. She named it after the fisherman, not the billionaire. Ramon understood why. He stood in the back of the room and applauded louder than anyone. The foundation's first project was a hotline for household workers experiencing abuse, wage theft, or illegal termination. Within its first year, it would help over 3,000 women. In Filipino culture, there is a word that has no clean English equivalent, Bayanihan. It refers to the spirit of communal unity, the idea that when one person carries a heavy load, the whole community lifts together. Liza Mendoza lived Bayanihan before she ever knew its name. She carried her family when they had nothing. She carried her dignity when powerful people tried to strip it away. She carried the truth when lies were easier. And when she finally had the power to destroy the man who had abandoned her, she chose instead to build something that would outlast them both. That is not weakness. That is the Filipino spirit, fierce, forgiving, and unbreakable. If you ask Liza today what the hardest part of her story was, she won't say the humiliation, the firing, or the years of poverty. She'll say it was the moment she looked at that photograph and realized that the man who threw her out of his house was the same man who should have been waiting at the door. But if you ask her what the best part was, she'll smile the same quiet, unshakable smile she inherited from Aling Nena, and she'll say, "The best part was learning that family isn't about blood. It's about who stays." Ernesto Mendoza stayed, Aling Nena stayed, Junjun stayed, and now 3,000 domestic workers across the Philippines know that someone is staying for them too. Because in Pinoy spirit, blood ties may heal, but Bayanihan builds empires.